Washington is making a big push for Oregon's top commit.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Before we get started, quick reminder to all the everydayers out there, wherever you're getting this, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure you click that subscribe button down below. Click that little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new video. Leave a like on the video, leave us a comment down below if you got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. If you're over on the audio-only side of things, leave us a 5-star review. It all does help us out a lot. And since Lars and I are out at every single spring practice, follow us on social media. We got our handles down below and at Locked On Huskies on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok as well. We got so much fun content that we're posting. Lars, as we promised on yesterday's show, we got a full recruiting episode coming at the everydayers. Talk about some critical targets like Mason James, S Chace Calicut, who've been on campus, but we have to start with the big fish, 5-star offensive tackle Kodi Greene, who was on campus over the weekend.
Yeah, it was when we were talking about this before the show, it was, when you think about it, you kind of take a step back and it's like, is it just kind of like a, compassion visit, or is it a visit of actual interest? And, this could lead to something. And we both feel like it's the latter, because you really, when Washington, you put the cards out on the table, Washington has everything, the resources, the availability in terms of looking at it, the position where he would start would be left tackle or even right tackle, whichever tackle position you want to look at him at. There's an opening to start next year in 2026. You look at her, exactly. I was like, wait, it's still always keeps still throwing me around. And then you look at it, you got his older brother, Kodi Greene. He's still on the roster, actually getting some reps in safety last week. So you're kind of looking at that saying, okay, the brotherly program about it, being back home in Washington, everything's there for him. And I think it really speaks to, again, where we've seen multiple Oregon commits come on campus, and whether it's Bott, Molitalo, or now Kodi Greene, you just look and think like Washington. There's certain battles that they're picking, and they seem to be winning more often than not.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting one to see how it plays out, where, our buddy Scott Eklund had the report over at dogman.com, Brandon Huffman as well with the 247 network. They both talked about, hey, yeah, there's certainly a lot of smoke coming out of the weekend, where I know On Three's Chad Simmons reported that his visit started on Friday, and then he stuck around for, spring practice on Saturday, which was really nice to see, because it just seems like he was, because since he goes to Modern Day down in Southern California, he might have just been up visiting family, doing all that sort of stuff. But having him on campus for that period of time and being able to make such an impact, on any 5-star offensive tackle, right? That's always a huge thing to consider. But having it be Oregon's top commit just seems like a whole different level of, this would be such a massive flip if Washington was able to pull this off. And that kind of is the big question, because as I look at this, you laid it out perfectly. Washington does have everything needed. And it's something that was in our buddy Scott's report, was NIL will certainly not be the issue if it comes down to that. And you just kind of start looking at all the other factors. And if you really want to just go through the recent development history of course, it's a different coaching staff now at Washington, but even if you go through their development from their time in Arizona, you point to that compared to what Oregon was able to do with, Dan Lanning. And sure, they sent a bunch of guys to the combine this year, but look at just kind of how the stock of a lot of those guys has gone just in terms of since they got there. It's very, very different. And that's something that certainly should resonate. And the more I look at it, the more I think Washington has the ammunition to pull off this flip.
And the bodies from Modern Day. If you look at, Tai was a former Modern Day guy, and you can look at this institution, the high school, and say, anytime we've sent them to Jedd Fisch's coaching staff, whether it be at Arizona or now at Washington with Marcus Harris and Dash Beerley, and I think, UW's always gotten guys, at least one or two guys from Modern Day over the years. The names off the top of my head kind of escape me.
Miles Morale is the first one that sticks out. Obviously, just different situation there.
Right, exactly. And so not even ones that always work out, but you still, you look at the most recent kind of trends, where I think that's why I mentioned Tai, because it's one of those guys where you're looking on, again, it's a defensive guy, but you're still saying, hey, we can develop you at anywhere we go, whether we did it at Arizona, Now he wanted to follow us to Washington. That speaks to a high character. And then, Marcus Harris flipping before signing day, everything like that, having Dash as his teammate. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kodi did play with Dash at quarterback last season, right? So that would have meant
That's right.
There's some ties there as well. So again, the familiarity of that doesn't guarantee. I mean, I think the 2027 quarterback is going to Boston College. So just because they played together in high school doesn't guarantee that you're going to go to college together. But certainly, as a quarterback, having some familiarity on the offensive side, that would definitely play a factor as well. And so I think just even more pieces. We can just add more and more chips the more we go through this segment of there's reasons why Kodi Greene to Washington is actually legitimate. And if you think about it, where when you're talking about flips and let's go after 5-star talent, you can go to Alabama, Florida, Texas, wherever. Those ones will be harder because let's say you get those commitments, the other schools are going to be coming around. In the South, it can be Georgia, Alabama, Florida, et cetera, and then even Penn State for some offensive linemen. You look on the West Coast, it's, hey, we got to keep these West Coast guys home. Why not? If it's a Big Ten battle where I'm going to the Big Ten regardless if it's Oregon or Washington, make it Washington. We've seen and if you want to throw in Texas, because I know we kind of threw that name out there before the start of the show, Washington's 2-0 against Texas in recent memory. So if I'm Kodi Greene, I'm thinking, well, yeah, Sark's great, all this, Kelvin Banks, all that, but Jedd's put guys in the NFL, and Washington as a brand is 2-0 against Texas. So, recency bias does play a factor.
So the more you kept talking, the more I was like, oh, that's something I need to respond to. That was something else I need. Let's start at the top where you and we talked about Kenny Pepe and if Washington might have been a dark horse contender for him a few weeks ago. Obviously, that didn't turn out to be fruitful, where he released the top 5. Washington's not part of that. But it feels like all of that energy that Washington put into going out and getting one of the best tackles in the country can hold true because Kenny Pepe, even though he's at IMG, was a West Coast guy originally. USC seems to be, well up there in terms of his top options. So it's just all that same energy that you wanted to put into going and getting one of the best offensive linemen in the country, you can now put into Kodi Greene. On top of that, you talk about the whole Texas thing like that. That's it. Where the other school that's in the mix outside of Oregon, obviously where he's still committed, is USC. So it's one of those things where you want to make sure that knowing that he more than likely, where 3 of the top 4 here are on the West Coast, would like to stay just in that region is something that can work to your advantage on top of being a hometown kid, right? Being from the Seattle area, starting his high school career at Eastside Catholic. So there's a lot that plays into that. And then I think this is the most important thing and something that truly shouldn't be underrated in this. We've seen what Oregon has built on the recruiting trail, right? Obviously they haven't turned that into a playoff win, but we've seen what they've built on the recruiting trail over the last couple of years. And I'm sure Jedd is looking at that and saying, hey, we were able to put together all of this with not even, close to that level of just, blue chip talent, whatever it is you want to call it. If we are able to go get some of those guys, why not go after our arch rival? Why not take the fight to them when that's what they've been doing to you for a while on the recruiting trail under, previous coaching staffs, whatever it is you want to say, and just do that same thing and just take the fight to Dan Lanning, to that Oregon staff and say, we know what kind of message this would send as we continue, down this trail that is the Big Ten, and adding just a player of that caliber would just be, I really didn't want to say this because I think it might be too big, but it would send shockwaves across the country in terms of, hey, look at what kind of talent Washington can go out and get with this coaching staff.
Absolutely. If anything, it shows you can push back where we can go through the list, whether it's Jabbar Muhammad transferring from UW to Washington, whether it's
UW to Oregon. Yeah.
But UW to Washington. That's great guy. Trying to think of the Vanderploot, the tight end,
sure.
that situation. Zach Saskowski. And again, you just go down the list of there's been so many that go one way to the other. This would be nice where it's like, hey, you know what? As we're moving into the Big Ten, it took us a year to get adjusted. Well, we can start swinging. We can start making punches and it's a calculated punch. That's the key here. This is what I like, where it's a West Coast guy. You're not doing it to where, oh, hey, we're gonna flip an Oregon commit from Kansas or wherever. It's like, look, just stay a little closer to the footprint. Make one that makes sense where you have the relationships, you have the family connections. And again, now imagine this: you're looking at Lowen and Derek Coleman Bruce and thinking, hey, we got the Green brothers, we got the Hatchet brothers, we got the Coleman Russo brothers. Like,
yeah.
Right? Exactly. You just go down the list, and so that's why you're making the correct battles to pick. You're not just saying we're going to go through Oregon's list and say, hey, we want all you guys just because it's Oregon and we're going to try and, be that, that have that energy. It's no. Jedd's using the resources in the correct ways and using the energy in the right ways. And I do think it was worth noting go after Kenny Pepe first. Make that big swing. Show that, you know what, we're willing to go all the way across the country. It didn't work out. You know what? Next best guys were right here. Ironically, the flip-flop of the quarterback situation.
I don't even know if you want to consider him the next best guy. It's, hey, you're interested. We almost want to turn our attention to you and see what that looks like. But Lars, he wasn't the only big-time prospect that was on campus over the weekend. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why I use Game Time. I love the last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. And with the all-in pricing, it means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So Lars, let's start with Chace Calicut because we saw the Mason James news. We'll get to that. Got a lot to say on that one. We put out a little blast to our insiders as well about that. You want to check that out. The link's down in the description below. But when I think about Chace Calicut, this is a really interesting one where On3 put out a report on Monday saying, hey, yeah, Texas is the favorite. Michigan is still pushing, but you can't count out Washington. And I'm sure some people are going to see that. Some people are going to read that and say, it's a hat on the table thing again. It's, oh yeah, it's nice to be in the final three. But I look at just how we've seen safeties utilized in, formerly Steve Belichick's defense, now Ryan Walters, and just what that looks like moving forward. And I think that could be a major selling point for him. And I think it's one of those things where, we just kind of talked about it with Kodi Greene. It's, if you want to go take a big swing, this is a great player to go do that with. And getting him on campus for, I believe this is the second time, is a big win in that regard. But then on top of that, it's, if you're able to steal him away from Texas and Michigan, out of Texas, by the way, that's a massive win for this coaching staff.
Another team where Washington beat him recently is Michigan. So again, it is that coaching staff. So Jedd Fisch could claim that one different defensive staff, obviously, but it's also why you go and get Ryan Walters, where you can establish that Big Ten defense right away. Guy who's done in the Big Ten and at Missouri, and also been able to show he can produce safeties as well, not just a cornerbacks guy. In that vein of Jimmy Lake, where wasn't just the outside, the Marcus Peters, those guys. He did have Taylor Rapp, Buda Baker. So you kind of cover the whole secondary there. And we've seen guys from Texas come to Washington. Levi, there's a number of guys that have come up from Washington and made it work. And also, as you mentioned, that as a freshman, you can play early at Washington. Like we expect Ryland Dillard-Allen to play as a freshman. How much? We'll wait and see. But that immediate playing time the recruits always were looking for, being able to get on the field in any way, shape, or form. Washington's got that. And then I'm intrigued about, I think since this is his first visit, I think it's the first visit with the new, with Taylor Mays being on staff. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think he came up before Mays or after Mays was hired for his first visit. So but either way, I think that relationship with Taylor Mays, having an former NFL player now at that position to pair him with Ryan Walters and John Richardson, I think that's also going to weigh pretty heavy on this. So as much as it sounds like or kind of could read like Washington just that hat on the table, I think there's a better chance than not. I'm not saying that they'll get him, but that it is a true 3-horse competition when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you mentioned Taylor Mays because it's one of those things where you look at Chace's style of play, where he's a 6'3", 190. He is a really, really big safety. He doesn't necessarily hit the way Taylor Mays does, but I don't think anybody does that. All of the old Madden players, by the way, have been on our TikTok comments about that over the last week or two since we got to talk to him, which has been really funny because I was like, oh yeah, he was on my Mutt team in 20, where it's that part of it is great as well. But I look at Chace's film and I say, this is a really fun, big, athletic sort of guy who can play a role similar to what Dylan Tiedemann did, in my opinion, in his defense at Purdue, and Ryan Walters' defense at Purdue, where he's just somebody who's going to be around the ball a lot, is athletic enough to find ways to make tackles, play down in the box if you want, play over the top, which is very, very important, as we talked to CJ Christian about that last week, where it's, yeah, we need guys that are going to be able to play both positions, both in the post and the drop safety is what they called it. So I think he's got the potential to play both those positions. And when we look at this depth chart where CJ Christen's out after this year, McElvestein's out after this year, you got Alex McLaughlin will have one more year of eligibility left. There's going to be opportunities for guys to step up and make plays. You and I have talked a lot about how we believe Ryland Dillard-Allen is one of those guys who's going to step up and just claim a starting spot probably in 2026 and moving forward. But there's no reason to believe that Chace Calicut can't be one of those guys to come in and play early, which has always been such a big point of emphasis with this coaching staff. It's, if you were able to get on the field early, you prove to us that you know the playbook, you can play on special teams, and you can just find a way to pick up everything quickly. We're not going to hold you off on the sidelines. We are going to get you on the field fast. And it feels like he's the kind of guy that can do that.
It's when we talk about competition, it's continuing to stack that elite level talent where if you truly feel like you're the best, whether you're a guy that's on the roster or coming in, you're not going to look at the room and say, oh, well, I want to be given the job day one. I don't want to have to work for it or earn it. No, it's like I want to prove that I'm the best guy and show in practice so you can play me on Saturdays or whatever the game happens to be played, that I actually am the best player and the guy that deserves the playing time. That's why you go and stack the classes. You don't get, a couple of 4 stars in one class and then the next 2 classes. Let's get some 2 and 3 stars. We don't want to really push the 4-star and 5 stars. We want to make sure they feel comfortable, coddle them a little bit. No. And especially with John Richardson, like we hear him at practice where it's like, no soft practice and when it comes to the DB. So you just look at it and think, you want that challenge. And Chace Calicut, every time I see a clip of him, whether it's on Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter, X, whatever. My point being that you just see it, and it's a guy, he's just always making plays one way or another, whether it's over the top or coming up and making, plays in 7-on-7 like that. To me, it's like you just can't say no to talent like that. And it's something you always mentioned when Jedd Fisch first got here. We're not going to say no to good talent. Like if you're elite, like I know I said 85, but if we happen to be at 87, I'll look over at Pat and say, here's some out of my salary. We'll figure it out.
No, absolutely. There's so many different ways to figure that out. And you could say the same at wide receiver with Mason James, where this is one thing where, you and I had a conversation about him last week. We had a couple of conversations about him over the last month or so, where he told On3's Chad Simmons that he thought he was going to make a decision sooner rather than later. Now, Lars, this is purely just me speculating, but I feel like, after taking a visit to Texas, I believe he'd visited Oklahoma again in that period of time. If he was ready to make a decision, it might have already come by now. So the fact that he announces on Thursday, I'm going to be up at Washington over the weekend for another unofficial, that's a good sign to me. And I look at just kind of the way this recruitment is played out, where Washington, as you've mentioned, went out to see him twice. Kevin Cummings went to Oklahoma twice during the allowed contact period in January to visit him in Norman. And as you said last week, now he's come back out twice. He came out for Junior Day and he came out over the weekend. And just the more I look at this, with Texas pushing late, they could still certainly close that gap. But I think if Oklahoma were going to be the move, it might have happened already. And I just look at this and I say, Washington is in a really, really great spot here, which is weird to say for a 4-star prospect from Oklahoma. But at the same point, it's a testament to Kevin Cummings.
It's really a testament to what this 2026 class might represent, because you went out and got a 4-star quarterback in New Jersey.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the rules flipped upside down, because it's still a good player, much like Mason James. This is a fantastic talent, just not from your traditional footprint. But Washington is not traditionally in the Big Ten. You're now in the Big Ten. Tradition, in a way, has to evolve. You don't throw it away. You don't throw the tradition away, because Washington will always still be a California West Coast type of institution. But if you have that talent, and by the way, you have a player who is reciprocal, and I think that's the important thing with both of these visits being unofficial, you're coming up on your own dime. This isn't I had one more official schedule and I already kind of have my decision made up, but I still want to follow through with the staff and make it up there and just get it over with. And they can kind of know in person, hey, it's not going to be you guys, but I appreciate the effort. No, it was the exact opposite. It's, hey, I've done all these visits, as you just mentioned. Let me take one more up to Washington. You don't do that if you don't have a legitimate interest, and a legitimately high interest, certainly at this point when you visit the other 2 schools that you just mentioned. And so for me, I remember when I talked to him about a month and a half ago now, my read was kind of like, okay, he definitely is interested. Let me talk to you in a month and let me see if that, because it wasn't a quick call, but it wasn't necessarily short. So it was kind of like, okay, let's see, you know what you're looking for. Washington clearly has that, similar to what we talked about with Kodi Greene. if you make one more visit, I'll buy in. If you don't, I'm going to be more hesitant. Now he's done that second visit. They could be a real player.
Absolutely, where he's coming back on an official visit over the June 6th weekend, which is really nice to see. And it's something you and I have talked about just in terms of prioritization, where we know he is the number one receiver target on Kevin Cummings' board. We know this is not going to be a year where you take 5 receivers like you did last year, where Kevin Cummings talked about that with us, saying, yeah, we really wanted to reload the talent in that room. Now that looks a little bit different, you can A, be a little bit more selective on who you want, but B, it allows the top targets that you're interested in to really know, hey, that's how much I'm being prioritized by this coaching staff, because they're only going after, obviously the offers are still out, right? But they're only really pushing hard for 3, 4, 5, 6 guys. And I think that's something that might really resonate in this particular case. But Lars, there are a couple other really critical targets that were on campus and some that we think might be moving closer to a decision. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Prize Picks. Baseball season's in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. Building my lineup this week, I'm picking Christian Campbell for more than 1.5 total bases and Shohei Ohtani for more than 1 stolen base. It's that easy. Setting up a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure. I always take advantage of Taco Tuesday, where Prize Picks offers discounts on select player projections for even more value. Download the app today and use the code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Lars, one guy that really stood out to me, and not just because he's got like bleach blonde hair at this point in time, but because he's 6'7", 230 pounds, was 3-star tight end Kai Wesley. I saw him on the field after practice on Saturday, talking with Jordan Pow for a little bit. And it's one of those things where I wrote about this a little bit over on Huskies Wire, where if Jordan Pow is selling him on a similar development track to what he had for Kaliki Latu in 2024, I wouldn't be surprised. And this is somebody who I've been really interested in for a while, because he's got that elite frame that you look for, right? Where he's not the highest ranked recruit in the world, which is certainly not a problem, as you and I have discussed many times, where he's ranked as the number 43 tight end in the country, number 14 player in Utah. But you look at the frame, you look at the athleticism, you look at the measurables, and you just say, along with the film too, and you say all the tools of being an elite tight end are there. Now it's up to the coach to mold them. And Jordan Pow has been one of the best at that over the last couple of years.
Absolutely. And also I would throw in location. Like anytime you can get a kid from Utah, that's kind of in the trenches position where you're talking D-line, O-line, or really tight end, because in that mold, he's got that 6'7" frame where if you want to put him in as an inline blocker, you have the perfect coach of Jordan Pow to get him up to the speed and be able to do that. The one thing also, Utah kids seem to come with a high football IQ, whether it's Voight and Newfie, we can go down the list of guys that have come from the state of Utah. They just seem to know and adapt. And it doesn't matter position. I know I just threw 2 D linemen out there when we're talking about a tight end. But
here, I got you. Shout out to Puka Nacua, who also went to Orem High School, just like Kai Wesley.
Perfect example where Puka's in a different category for me personally. Just
100%.
Because, but a perfect name in the same light, where it's guys that are just, you're not surprised when they come in as a freshman and sophomore and they've played, call it, let's just say 16 games at minimum. And that's just because, for whatever reason, whether it's, the high school coaching, whether it's just the overall talent pool that you're working with, it's a good hotbed to go from. And I think when we look at what they're doing in the tight end class, where you have Miri in Ohio, Camden Jensen, you got a couple of others, Jordan Pow knows for a certain type, where we really, again, is this kind of hallmark of the coaching staff where Jedd has a certain type of quarterback. Scotty has a certain type of running back, types at running back, 2 specific types more or less.
Yeah.
Kevin Cummings has a couple of types of receivers. Jordan Pow has a couple of types of tight end. When you look at Baronione and Austin Simmons, 2 different types of tight ends, but 2 equally important guys to have. So let's say you get Kai Wesley in the fold. I'm curious who would be the other perfect match to pair with him, because we know there's a couple of other guys that are coming in officials as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Where I feel like Kakuamu would be a really interesting name to watch in that light, where the 3-star tight end from IMG Academy, who's just a really big physical, just product that you can find a whole bunch of different ways to utilize a guy like that. And just one last thing on Kai before we move on is he's somebody who came up with his brother this weekend, and his younger brother Steeler, who's a tight end in the 2028 class, got an offer from Washington. So you mentioned the brother thing earlier. Here's just another potential case of that, right? Where that's just always been a big selling point.
Also, great name. I just wanted to add
that. Oh, fantastic. Great 11 out of 10 name. Yes. So let's move on to another guy who's on campus over the weekend. That was Ezaya Tokio from Oceanside High School in Southern California, where I look at this linebacker class and I look at a lot of the bodies that this coaching staff has been interested in, whether it be, Ramzak Fruin, whether it be Wasila Lobi before he flipped to Stanford. And now it still sounds like he's coming back with an official visit that he set up. So might not be out of that race completely just yet. But I look at Ezaya Tokio, who's listed at 6'4", 200 pounds. And he certainly looked the part, seeing him on campus. But I look at this linebacker class and I look at what this coaching staff took in last year. I think he would be a really, really nice add where I just kind of looked at this linebacker class and said, you can take a really projectable high upside group this year that doesn't necessarily need to get on the field right away because of some of the guys you have in front of you. And then if someone forces their way out of the field, great. Where I looked at it and I said, I feel like an ideal linebacker class might look like Ezaya Tokio, Ramzak Fruin, and Bo Jandro from Arizona. You get those three guys in there. You have some big, promising athletes who can really move super well. And I just, after looking at Ezaya Tokio over the weekend, where I believe he's just one of the lower rated guys that Washington is recruiting at the position. Again, not that there's any problem with that, but it might just lead some fans to look at that and say, oh, well, why not go after this guy? But just seeing that kind of frame that he has, he looks like he can play at 230, 235 if he really wanted to.
So this is not necessarily a bad thing, but I swear CFP 25, college football back in NCAA 2014, back in the day, there would always be that linebacker out of Southern California that was like just athletically freaked. You look at the list and you're like, wow, you know what? I don't care what they have him listed at. I just need that dude on my roster. And you can even go, pull it into a real life example like Kyron Barnes. There's always somebody from that Southern California area where and they're always a linebacker. It's always a linebacker. You're just looking like, that dude's going to be a guy. He's just going to be a guy no matter what. You just look at the frame and projectability. And so I absolutely like kind of that linebacker class that you laid out because in a similar light, kind of just to pair it, speaking of other crucial targets that we're talking about, what about his brother Nico? Where would he fit in that? Because you look and think, wait, how does safety pair out? Whether or not you get Chace Calicut, maybe you want a second. Exactly. And then you call that a wrap there because you already have CJ Lavender, enough guys that are young at that position on the roster. I don't know if you'll take more than 2 or 3. So that to me would seem to be, that would be a perfect kind of round out of the class. And it's one thing that we both talk a lot, that Jedd Fisch kind of regurgitates a lot, projectability. There's so many different things where you're not pigeonholed by one guy to say he can only do this, or he can only do that. Like, but all 3 guys can kind of do a number of different things. And so how that comes to fruition will be really intriguing.
So Lars, last thing before we get out of here, let's talk about these O'Day guys. Because I have a feeling, we've seen them on campus for a couple of unofficial visits, not just at the junior day, but with some spring practices as well. I have a feeling that Washington is really going to try to make a big push over, let's just call it's April 21st as we record this. Let's just call it the next 3 to 4 weeks to try to close on one, if not both of them. We've seen David Schwerzel really pick up some steam on the recruiting trail. He got an offer from Notre Dame a week or 2 ago. And it's one of those things where the more I look at this, the more I say, we know that this coaching staff wants them to be a part of this 2026 class. We know this coaching staff wants a lot of defensive linemen, and getting big physical bodies from, a traditionally UW heavy pipeline would be such a great building block. And I don't know, if I were to make a bet right now, I'd say Siale would be the one that would pull the trigger first out of the 2 of them. But I think getting both those guys in the boat is critical for this class.
Yeah. Time is of the essence. The fancy Brolux right here. I'm not saying time is of the essence, but it's one thing we talked about a lot last summer. And, one thing that, we've been hearing where it's like the April wave. Well, it's April 21st when we record this, April 22nd when it comes out. We haven't necessarily seen a wave of commitments come like we might have thought we would, especially, by the middle of this month. As you get into the early part of May when you have the spring game, that would be the time, or maybe add a couple, 2, 3, 4 commits, one being a local guy. If it's FA, great. That'd be a solid addition, because then I would imagine David at some point down that, kind of pretty quickly down the line is going to follow suit, whether it be to Washington or somewhere else, just because really the beginning of May is when you start seeing a lot of guys like, okay, hey, you know what? Took my visits in April. Let me start to kind of, wind things down, know where I'm going, because you're talking about 2 or 3 schools for a lot of these kids. Now, some it's a little bit different, but I think especially in these local guys where you mentioned Notre Dame coming in for Schwerzel, how, is Notre Dame really going to make a push? Are you scheduling an official? Does that mean you're going to go into, fall and keep this thing all the way open? Kids sometimes say that. And then, 2 months later, we're talking about their commitment to a certain school. And it's like, okay, well, it's hard to envision these guys lasting into June without a decision, but you never know.
No, I agree with you there. That's always just going to be something to monitor, because a lot of them have these officials set up through the middle or the end of June, right? And it's something where you always have to consider where Washington is for these visits. For David, it's the spring game. It's May 2nd. And for Siale, I believe it's that first weekend in June. I could be wrong about that one. I feel like you might have changed that date at some point. But those are things we're all going to monitor right here on Locked On Huskies. And Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all every day tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. Any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on